One of the seemingly most puzzling aspects of the modern state of Israel, established in 1948, is the following paradox. Israel has proven itself to be a modern-day miracle. It began as a tiny, poor country with a small, inexperienced army and with hardly any equipment. It has been consistently attacked by its neighbors, hundreds of times larger in size and population. Not only has it managed to survive, it has built the most sophisticated and lethal army in the Middle East, and one of the best in the world. Its intelligence capabilities is second to none, and its economic strength and technical innovations and success is the envy of the world. Yet, after 75 years, it remains the most vulnerable and threatened country in the world. It is the only country in the world surrounded by hundreds of thousands of missiles and hundreds of thousands of soldiers, which are all there for the sole purpose of annihilating her. Yet, even though Israel is capable of completely and utterly destroying all her enemies decisively, for some reason, they do not do so. They have demonstrated their incredible capabilities over and over again. They can penetrate deep into Iran and surgically eliminate the head of Hamas in one of the most guarded buildings in Tehran. They can surgically eliminate a missile battery at a heavily protected nuclear installation deep into Iranian territory over 1,000 miles away. They can surgically target the pagers and walkie-talkies of thousands of Hezbollah terrorists. Yet, when attacked by the weakest army in the world, one that doesn't have a single tank or fighter jet, they seem to be severely inhibited. They failed miserably in protecting our brothers and sisters from 6,000 Hamas terrorists, including thousands of men, women, and children in civilian clothing who breached a multi-million-dollar high-tech security fence in over 100 places. And they failed miserably for hours and hours after the massacre, when not one single helicopter or aircraft came to the rescue. It has been a whole year now, and Hamas is not even close to being defeated. Israel eliminated about 20,000 Hamas terrorists. They have imprisoned thousands more, but there are probably another 20,000 terrorists embedded among the population who will emerge the minute Israel is forced to leave Gaza. The 20,000 that were eliminated will be replaced in a year with new and eager recruits who are being trained as we speak. The IDF, with its incredible capabilities and courageous soldiers, only managed to rescue 8 out of 250 hostages, being held in torturous conditions in the hellholes of Gaza, and sadly they accidentally killed more than the amount that they actually rescued. Over 100 hostages are still languishing there after a year. Many have tragically already died from abuse or outright murder. And the vicious terrorists our amazing Israeli soldiers have captured will all be released sooner or later in some kind of lopsided deal. The IDF did succeed in downgrading Hamas and destroying a huge portion of their tunnels and missile launchers and factories, but it has come at an enormous cost. Over 350 pure souls of our heroic brothers and sisters were tragically taken from us, thousands of widows and orphans. Many thousands were severely injured and handicapped for life. 100,000 Israeli citizens are living in internal exile for the past year because it is unsafe for them to return to their homes. The economy has been severely hit, and many thousands of families have lost their source of income. The obvious question is, if Israel can obliterate all their enemies in a matter of days, and I'm referring to every single one of them, including the head of the octopus, Iran, plus all its proxies and militias in the Middle East, if they are capable militarily to bring peace and security to the citizens of Israel, why have they not done so? The pager and walkie-talkie attack would have been a perfect opportunity to completely destroy Hezbollah when they were in a state of complete disarray, but Israel did not do so. A few short weeks ago, 100 Israeli jets knocked out 1,000 Hezbollah missile launchers in 15 minutes. In 2 hours, they could have knocked out every single one of them and thus completely neutralized the entire threat from the north. But for some reason, they did not do so. The answer to these questions are in this week's Torah portion, Ki Savai, in Deuteronomy chapter 28. Here is where God warns the Jews of the terrible consequences if they abandon the moral and holy ways of the Torah and embrace the decadent practices of the pagan nations that surrounded ancient Israel. The Torah says in verse 36, God will bring you and your elected king to a nation unknown to you and your fathers, and there you will serve foreign gods of wood and stone. This is repeated again in verse 64. God will scatter you among the nations from one end of the earth to the other. There you will serve gods of wood and stone, unknown to you and your fathers. Many verses in the Hebrew Bible cannot be understood based on the text alone, because along with the written text of the 5 books of Moses, God spent 40 days and 40 nights teaching Moses how to interpret these verses, and these interpretations were passed down to us throughout the generations until this very day. In the verses I just quoted as well, the simple superficial reading of the text is misleading. There is no record of significant numbers of Jews who were involved in any form of pagan worship after the destruction of the first temple in the year 3338 from creation, almost 2,500 years ago. Secondly, for most of this period, the Jews were exiled among Christian and Islamic nations, not pagan nations who bowed down to idols of wood and stone. And that is exactly the true meaning of these verses. The worship of wood and stone is symbolically referring to Christianity and Islam. Christianity is centered around the wooden crucifix, and Islam is centered around the stone building called the Kaaba in Mecca, which also has a mysterious black stone embedded on one of its corners, upon which the Muslims have built many myths. The Christian and Islamic nations are identified with their core beliefs, which form the prism through which they see the world and live their lives. Thus, what God is actually saying is that the Jews will have to be subservient and worship people whose core beliefs can be symbolically referred to as wood and stone. In simple language, this means that during our time of exile we are not free or independent. We need to abide by the dictates imposed upon us by the nations amongst whom we are exiled. Of course, we do not have to listen to all of their rules, only the ones relating to civil law, and only the ones that are moral and legitimate. Anything that gets in the way of our following the ways of Torah and mitzvahs needs to be opposed with all our might, even at the cost of death and suffering, something which we have done untold thousands of times throughout our history. But even regarding our physical survival, if everything the nations wanted to inflict upon us would have succeeded, we would have been long gone. That is why in Leviticus chapter 26, where there is another long list of tragedies we will suffer in exile, God declares in verse 44, "Even when they are in their enemy's land, I will not grow disgusted with them, nor tired of them, so as to allow them to be destroyed. I will not break my covenant with them, since I am God their Lord, and I remember the covenant with their original ancestors whom I brought out of Egypt in the sight of all the nations, so as to be a God to them." So that even though we suffered enormously throughout our entire time of exile, up until this very day, our existence has also been accompanied with great and continuous miracles. The amazing success of the state of Israel and the numerous successes of its army were all orchestrated by God in fulfillment of His covenant to protect us, even during our time of exile. However, we must not forget that this does not in any shape or form mean that we can have an independent state with an independent government capable of making independent decisions. The above prophecies that I quoted earlier in this week's Torah portion, in Tavo, in Deuteronomy chapter 36, refer to our entire time in exile until the Messiah comes and reestablishes a Jewish kingdom which will have complete independence. Mashiach will not only be unconstrained and totally independent to act in the sole interest of the Jewish people in the land of Israel, but he will eventually rule all the nations of the world. Secular Zionists who believe that they can create an independent country were totally clueless and oblivious to the fact that this is actually impossible until Mashiach comes. Many religious Zionists as well are under the illusion that it is possible to have absolute independence during our time in exile, although by now most of them have come to their senses. The reason why Israel cannot defeat her enemies is because Western Christian civilization, led by the United States, does not want her to. The Muslims obviously also don't want them to. And we are still subservient to the nations represented by wood and stone. So independence is not going to happen under the current structure of the State of Israel, regardless of who is sitting in the Prime Minister's office. It is not going to happen until the time that God decides to end our exile once and for all and send the righteous Mashiach. As we have explained in many of our videos, that time is practically upon us. May all the Jewish people merit to celebrate the upcoming holidays in the land of Israel in peace and security under the righteous leadership of Mashiach Tzidkenu. Good Shabbos.